Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Oxford Union. Indeed, welcome to Oxford. I know many of you have travelled far and wide to do this MBA, and it really means a lot that one of your first ports of call is the Oxford Union. We're delighted to have you. Before we proceed with the debate and the excitement to come, I'd like to talk very briefly about the Oxford Union, about what it is and about what you're about to see. So the Union was founded in 1823, which seems like a long time ago, but I suppose relative to how long Oxford has been around, it's quite recently. We started out on the high street, and you can see today, you'll see a pink building and a blue building, and you'll see the two rooms are exactly the same size. Now, one of those rooms was a debating chamber, and one of those rooms was a smoking area. And I think it says a lot that they're exactly the same. Obviously, since then, we've moved, we've expanded, and we continue to do what we did then, which is to protect free speech. And we do that in the forms of our debates, where world leaders challenge each other on key policy issues, and we do that with the speakers who we host. Some are controversial, but ultimately they come here to be challenged. I think what we should do now is talk about the forms and the rules of the debate. The style that we use is British parliamentary style. Now, that might be self-evident by virtue of the setup. You'll see there's a proposition bench and an opposition bench, much like you'll have a Conservative bench and a Labour bench in the Houses of Commons. And crucially, you'll see two dispatch boxes, these sort of strange constructions on either side of Zoe, who's acting as my secretary today. Now, back in the day, as you might say, these dispatch boxes would have featured Bibles. So if you were speaking, you'd leave your hand on it, and of course you'd be speaking the truth. Now, we have a slight problem nowadays that you can't trust people to speak the truth with a Bible. People have different Bibles, people don't even believe. So instead, different presidents will leave in something they think is important. And if you lift up that lid, you'll see a copy of Percy Shelley's works from a previous president. And if you lift up that lid, you'll see a rubber chicken, which I suppose is symptomatic of where we are today. Nonetheless, it's a formal style. It's one that's been practiced for many, many years. And I suppose the only difference between here and Parliament is the absence of lines on either side of the benches. If you ever watch Prime Minister's Questions or ever watch BBC Parliament, you'll notice these lines in front of the benches. Now, they demarcate something which doesn't necessarily apply today. So the sort of gap between those lines is the furthest distance between drawn swords in which it's still safe. Obviously, people would have taken their swords into Parliament. Things might have got a bit tense if you had a particular debate going on. And so actual Parliament has a line to ensure people didn't clash in a potentially fatal way. Given this is a university, swords I don't think were quite as much on the agenda, so we don't have those lines. But I would ask the speakers if they do have swords to just keep them by their side in absence of the lines. So each speaker is going to have 6 minutes. They will be told by Zoe when their time is running out. You will be able to interrupt those speakers. You can offer a point of information. A point of information has to be fact, though. You can't just say point of information and then say your opinion. And you also have to be accepted by the speaker, and the speaker has every right to reject you. If they're in full flow, they can tell you to put your hand down and you have to listen. If you'd like to make a point of information, put your hand up, say point of information, stand up, but don't speak until you're recognized by any of the speakers. The second form of interruption is a point of order. Now, a point of order is if you believe that one of the speakers has broken the rules of the House. For example, if they say something slanderous, if they shout from the gallery, and essentially if they run over time or anything else that pertains to the actual rules. I don't think we're going to need to worry about that too much, but I would encourage you to put forward your points of information. The other way you'll be able to get involved tonight is with some questions. We'll take a break after the first 6 speakers before the final 2 speakers, in which you'll be able to put your hands up, I'll choose you, and you can pose some questions to the speakers about what they've said. And I really would encourage you to get involved. So I think that's enough for the spiel. I'm sorry if you're already bored. We've got quite a long way to go. And I think we should turn to the motion before the House, which is, this House believes there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to increase its profits. I look to Professor Oren Sisman to open the case for the proposition. Thank you very much.
There are 2 types of companies in the world. Those whose profit motive is aligned with the common good, and those whose profit motive is not aligned with the common good. Those whose profit motive is aligned with the common good don't even have to think about whether they operate for profit or the common good, because it's the same thing. So How do they create? How do they enhance the common good? They produce stuff that people want to use. They create jobs. They open new markets, sometimes markets that are highly visible. It's not a problem at all. And if we want to think about Adam Smith, he said, whether they think about the common good or they think about profit, the invisible hand of the market will guarantee that they will act for the common good. And I'm an economist. If I had to test this proposition, I would measure the common good. I would measure the profit. I would not be able to distinguish between the common good and the profit, because whenever one goes up, the other goes up. So we can forget about these companies. The other company, or the other type of companies, are companies whose profit motive is not aligned with the common good, like mining companies, companies that pollute, companies that perhaps exploit the poor, whatever. So what do we do with these companies? There are two possibilities. The first possibility is that we tell them, dear company, please switch off your profit motive because we realize that it's not contributing to the common good. And we ask you to switch on another motive, which is the common good, right? The second approach is Friedman's approach, and this is saying, this is never going to work. Why isn't it going to work? It's not going to work because profit is in the DNA of the capitalist firm. This is how these companies build themselves. This is how they report. This is how they recruit young MBAs. This is how they incentivize them. This is how they promote them if they contribute to profit. And you can't, it's simply impossible to shut the profit motive off. So, if it's impossible to do, what's the point to pretend that it can be done or that it should be done? So probably you're asking yourself now, okay, so these are companies that don't contribute to the common good. What should we do about them? Well, the answer is simple. We should regulate them. That's what we have governments for. And the governments will levy taxes on them or put some laws on them, so that if they don't operate according to the tax or the law, that will undermine their profit motive, and that way you can realign them again with tough regulation with the common good. So now probably you're asking yourself the following question. You might be saying, fine, we understand that it's not going to work, but what's the harm in trying? Perhaps it won't work, but maybe it will work. So let's try it anyway. And if it doesn't do anything good, at least it will do some good PR for the business world. Now, I would like to argue that actually the idea that companies can work for something else than the private profit is actually a very damaging idea. Why is it so damaging? Well, the first reason that it is so damaging is because it will soften regulation. These companies will come to the regulator and say, dear regulator, you don't have to regulate us. Why don't you have to regulate us? Because we switched off the profit motive. Now we are reformed. We have changed. Our DNA has been re-engineered, and we are going to work only for the benefit of the common good. And the regulator might be tempted to believe this kind of thing and will say, okay, I don't have to regulate you. I can be soft on you. And I recommend everyone in this room who's interested in the question to go to the website of Al Jazeera, which has an excellent documentary now called Pricing the Market. And they document in great detail how companies that cause a huge environmental damage actually at the same time put on a big show of PR with a few insignificant projects, and at the same time that they damage the environment, they also manage to win all sorts of environmental prizes because they say all the right thing, they put all the right they write words on the website. They have a big part of the website about corporate responsibility, and they win the prize. That's one reason why it's harmful. But it's not only harmful for regulation, it's even harmful for the companies themselves. Why is it so harmful? Because it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, the companies are going to be blamed later on for that not working. You want an example? Here's an example. Why did we have a financial crisis? Well, we had a financial crisis because the economy as a whole lended too much. Now, who's blamed for that? Well, in my view, the regulators have to be blamed for that. They allow the banks to expand credit too much. Instead, the banks have taken all the blame. Some bankers went to jail. How much time do I have? Your finger is on the trigger. So bankers have been taken to court. Bankers have been deprived of, were fired. Why? Because everyone was expecting them to internalize the common good, to act for the common good, but actually they were working for the profit motive. There are many other examples. As I said, I recommend everyone to go to this great program in Al Jazeera and see how companies are playing the system under the flag of the common good.
I thank the Professor for his speech, and now look to Mr. Alan Morrison to open the case for the opposition. Thank you.
Mr. President, my honourable opponent and I have similar worldviews. I'm a classical liberal. I verge on the libertarian. I think a free market operating under the rule of law is a beautiful thing. But he and I appear to differ in a couple of respects. Firstly, I can tell the time. Secondly, we appear to differ in our views on business. Let me summarize what you've just heard. It can be boiled down to the first verse of the classic 1979 Flying Lizards lyric, Money. The best things in life are free, but you can give those to the birds and bees. I want money. That's what I want. It's what I want. It's what I want. Our argument, in contrast, is well summarized in the poetry of the famous Sesame Street song, Cooperation Makes It Happen. I saw these crazy dudes and they went out on the street. They were cleaning out the empty lot and making it neat. I said, man, is this cool? What are you trying to do? They said, making a garden for me and you. Come on, join us, man. Come on, let's go. Together, we can make a pretty garden grow. More precisely, this motion is about responsibility. It's a difficult word. We're responsible when first we acknowledge that we create our own life plans, and sometimes those of others, and second, when we accept the justice of this situation. So responsibility is closely tied to personal autonomy. Without responsibility, we lead incomplete lives and we fail to fulfill our potential as human beings. So it's extraordinarily hard to find a better place to start a discussion of business than with the notion of personal responsibility. And this is where I part company with my honourable opponent. Business does not exist solely to maximise shareholder returns. Businesses are places where individuals go to exercise their personal autonomy by doing useful stuff together. So, for example, a rather trivial element of my plan of life is a desire to wear decent shoes. So, for example, Trickers make them. When they intermediate between me, craft shoemakers, farmers, and other interested parties, we're all exercising our responsibility to choose a life plan when we deal, and Trickers is helping us to do this. None of us is very concerned in this exercise of our responsibility with Trickers' profitability. In fact, I checked this out. Last weekend, I pursued some primary research in preparation for this debate. I started out by asking the checkout guy at Waitrose what he thought his business responsibility was. Then I asked the same question in a fast food outlet, a wine merchant, a bookstore, and a pub. I got some pretty colourful responses, but none of them featured the word profit. So I telephoned a bank director. He definitely used the word profit, but he used quite a lot of other words too. Business organisations are tools that stakeholders use to collaborate in useful ways, and that allows them to exercise their personal autonomy. But as a matter of positive fact, those stakeholders seldom see their responsibility or their exercise of autonomy in terms of profit. Is it meaningful to talk about the responsibility of business independently of the responsibility of business stakeholders? Well, of course not. Business is no more responsible than any other abstract noun. Perhaps, though, the responsibilities of senior business people, perhaps their responsibilities are solely to make a profit. But I think that's nonsense. Managers arrange the institutional framework that allows people to come together at a business and do useful stuff. It's useful enough when they extract a profit, and if they're really useful, then their profits are absolutely huge. But their responsibility is to the usefulness of their actions, their ability to bring people together cooperatively, and not solely per se to the profit they generate. In other words, as the eminent rapper Alik Ice famously said, entrepreneurship is about making life easier for humanity, while money becomes a byproduct. It's quite hard to rap that. Managers have a responsibility to humanity's desire to collaborate usefully and not solely to the profit motive. So the motion is incorrect as a matter of positive fact. Normatively, it's a recipe for dystopia. For example, how should a business person react when she's faced with a naive customer who does not understand that, say, the mortgage she's being sold or the insurance policy that's being sold is inappropriate? On the one hand, the business person could sell the mortgage and realize a profit. On the other hand, she could appreciate her responsibilities and advise the customer not to borrow. It's intuitively obvious to me that the former approach, which is dictated by a focus solely upon profit, is wrong. Trust in business and social life in general would completely collapse in a society where that sort of focus was legitimate. Of course, my honourable opponent has already responded to this point by arguing that profit maximisation should occur within the law and that we should regulate away this sort of problem. He could point to the $14 billion fine recently imposed on Deutsche Bank for making the wrong decision in precisely the mortgage situation. But the law cannot precisely pin down what is allowable, and allowing actors to maximise profit within the law and without recourse to anything else would probably lead to disaster. So many of the decisions and so many of the rules that guide our behaviour are not written down. They're embedded in our social environment and our culture. As the former Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks said, those who believe that a liberal democracy and the free market can be defended solely by the forces of law and regulation without an internalized sense of duty and morality are tragically mistaken. So, in summary, you face a choice between the flying lizards and the Muppets. The lizards prioritize money. The Muppets do not. They understand the collaborative nature of business and the value of a pretty garden. You have to decide whether your vision of responsibility mirrors the lizards or the Muppets. But it's clear to me that responsibility runs far deeper than profit, and the Muppets are more attractive than lizards. So I strongly urge you to vote for collaboration and for personal autonomy, and hence, resoundingly, to reject this motion.
I thank the honourable member for his speech, and I'll look to Cecilia Varendh-Manssonm to continue the case for the proposition. Thank you.
Honourable Chairman, opponents, colleagues, and honourable ladies and gentlemen, and foremost, honourable and highly talented MBA class of 2016-17. It is a true honour to be here tonight at the renowned Oxford Union to speak in favour of tonight's topic. This House believes that there is one and only one social responsibility of business, and that is to increase profit. My highly passionate, enthusiastic, and honourable opponent here just made some very highly, seemingly convincing arguments here. However, I'm not convinced, and I will, during my 6 minutes here tonight, do my best to prove him wrong. However, I am a little bit puzzled, I must say. We have two professors here and two MBA alumni from Oxford University trying to be naive enough to stand to claim that Milton Friedman, one of the most renowned economists in the world, Nobel Prize laureate, are indeed wrong. I personally believe that there is one and only one responsibility for business, and that is to increase profit. But before going into why, please let me take a few seconds, step back, and introduce a few definitions. So again, let me remind you about the propositions tonight, part of the Milton Friedman doctrine. This house believes that there is one and only one social responsibility, and that is to increase profit. So social responsibility, when I'm putting forth my arguments tonight, in social I refer to all stakeholders directly related to a business and all stakeholders indirectly related to the business. And their responsibility, businesses cannot be responsible, so when I'm speaking about responsible in my argument, I'm referring to business executives. And last but not least, profit. I'm defining profit tonight to be monetary profit, and in that I'm excluding non-for-profit organizations or NGOs. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that there is only one social responsibility for business, and that is profit, for three main arguments. First of all, business executives are elected and recruited to maximize the return of investors' money. And secondly, in order to maximize profit in today's economical environment, you have to be socially responsible. And thirdly, it is not the responsibility of business executives to take care of the problems, of the root causes of societal inequalities. So let me elaborate a little bit more. First and foremost, business executives are recruited by shareholders or elected by employers to fulfill certain expectations and obligations. And tonight, as we are excluding NGOs, and I'm allowed to continue, right? Yes. Tonight, since we are excluding non-for-profit organizations and NGOs, that obligation is to maximize the return of investors' money and to pay salaries to their employees. It is not the responsibility of business executives to take care of social challenges. That is the responsibility of governments. Because think about if business executives are increasing prices of goods or decreasing salaries of their employees in order to cover costs incurred by trying to act socially responsible, in a way, in accordance with Milton Friedman, they are leveraging taxes on shareholders, and they're also using their power to use the money of shareholders in relation to the business. And that is, again, not their responsibility. It is the responsibility of the government. However, business executives are responsible to abide to the rules set by the complex constitutional environment in which they are operating in. Let us not forget that the Melinda and Bill Foundation's splendid work has been made possible due to Microsoft's strong emphasis on profit maximization. Secondly, in today's business environment, the way to maximize profit is to act socially responsible. So may I ask you, has anyone in this room ever owned or know anyone who has ever owned a pair of Tom shoes? Okay, yes, great. So did you know that Tom Shoes is a for-profit organization that is using social awareness campaigns in order to maximize their profit? So in reality, they are, for every shoe that they sell, giving away one pair of shoes for free for unprivileged individuals. And this strategy to maximize profit in order to be social responsible has proven very successful. Since 2006, they have given away 35 million shoes, and they reported a profit last year of over 400 million USD. Wow. Thirdly, so we have to ask ourselves, my honorable opponents here seems to have gotten the purpose of the business a little bit wrong. What is the purpose of corporations? What is the responsibility of business executives? Is it to take care of the root causes of fundamental inequalities, or is it indeed to deliver the best products and the best service to its customers? I certainly believe the latter. And in order to constantly provide the best services and the best products to customers, the business executive ought to invest into R&D, to stimulate investment in creativity, and in that open up opportunities for societies, and in that helping economies grow, develop, and prosper. So please let me leave you with yet another Milton Friedman quote. Most economists' fallacies derive from the tendency to assume that there is a fixed pie that one party can gain only at the expense of another. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for her speech, and I would remind those wishing to make a point of information that it's helpful to stand up, and then if the speaker likes the look of your face, they might decide to take the point. We will have time for some questions, and you might be able to respond to the comment over there, well, the pending comment as it were, but more on that later. I now turn to Tana Jambaldoj to continue the case for the opposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable opponents, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great privilege to stand before you tonight and argue against the resolution that I believe represents one of the silliest and most harmful ideas of our time. The idea that the sole, one and only social responsibility of business is to maximize its profits is as misguided and demeaning to business as it is to suggest that the sole motivation of one's life is to eat. Sure, we all eat, we all have to eat, and we definitely enjoy eating, but even for a huge foodie like myself, to reduce the purpose of my life to the pursuit of food diminishes the fuller and broader meaning of life. The sole social responsibility of business is not to maximize its profits, it is to create value. Value is not just limited to shareholder value or financial value. Creating value means having three things: a mission that focuses on what the business aspires to achieve, prioritization of long-term sustainability, and a focus on serving all of its stakeholders. Only when business can focus on creating value as such can they best serve their business and social interests. Firstly, business must have a purpose and mission that is not just to increase its profits. Let's look at some of the mission and vision statements of some of the world's most profitable companies. General Electric, one of Fortune 500's top 10 most valuable and most profitable companies in 2015. They have the following mission statement: GE is a diversified technology, media, and financial services company dedicated to creating products that make life better. Creating products that make life better. That's the value GE strives to create through its products, through the improved lives of its customers, and the communities they impact. Nowhere in that statement does it say profit. Well, what about Morgan Stanley, one of the most profitable financial services companies? Connecting people, ideas, and capital, we will be the world's first choice for achieving financial aspirations. Be the world's first choice for achieving financial aspirations. It does not say that achieving our financial aspirations, it says the world's financial aspirations. Both of these companies, and the majority of successful companies, big and small, have a value proposition that is a lot broader and more meaningful to the world around them than just to increase its profits. And frankly, denied. Because of that, they are able to achieve the best financial results. Second, businesses must have a focus on sustainability. And by sustainability, I mean prioritizing long-term as well as short-term returns. When businesses make profit maximization their goal, they fall into a short-term trap. The short-term pursuit of profit maximization is simple enough. Try to sell at the highest sellable price by expending the lowest possible costs. But this formula fails over the long term to be sustainable. Businesses should, in relevant capacities, contribute to the common goods of society, such as public education, infrastructure, and environment. While Friedman would argue that it is solely the government's responsibility to keep up to date and functioning these resources through the taxes collected from the public, businesses draw upon and affect these common resources in varying capacities that cannot be, or at least isn't, addressed by government alone. For example, I worked at Rio Tinto, a large global mining company that 25 years ago had to shut down its Bougainville mine in Papua New Guinea. This was due to public uproar and civil unrest over the environmental impact caused by them dumping its tailings into the local river for decades. The environment throughout the area was destroyed, and the livelihoods of generations of people were destroyed. Even though Papua New Guinea's legal system at the time did not regulate this because they hadn't evolved enough to be regulating such problems. And so Rio Tinto lost out on decades of future earnings, and that was a huge lesson learned for the company, that even if they can legally get away with something without assessing the social impacts, it doesn't mean that it works out for them in the future. Since then, Rio Tinto is at the forefront of addressing environmental concerns above and beyond existing regulations. The company also increasingly focuses on the communities they operate in, such as helping fund better public health and education facilities. Why spend shareholder money on such social causes? Isn't that a distraction? Well, because in the long term, that makes business sense. The people served through these expenditures will in time become their main human resource pool. Not to mention, operating in a healthier and more educated community has many long-term benefits for the company, such as more economic development and less crime to deal with. Finally, a strong and valuable business must consider all of its stakeholders. These stakeholders are not just shareholders, they also include customers, clients, employees, suppliers, and the wider society. It's easy to say that just by honoring the contracts that we have with each of these stakeholders, that's enough, but there must be an underlying strategy for determining prices and service standards for customers, setting wages and conditions for employees, for managing relationships with suppliers and partners. In doing so, only by assigning value to each of these relationships beyond what meets the minimum standards and of acceptability can businesses in return derive and deliver maximum value. This in turn also creates profit. Mr. Chairman, I want to address the audience, members of the Oxford MBA class of 2016-17, as you embark on what will be one of the most intellectually challenging and enriching years of your life. I really hope that you come out of business school with having at least gained or reinforced the notion that business exists and stands for so much more than just profit, that doing well means doing good. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for her speech, and now look to Madhu Jagadish to continue the case for the proposition.
All right. I'm just checking my feed. The last time I was here, I was literally shivering in my pants, so just making sure that's not happening. Anyways, good evening, beautiful ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Oxford Union. Tana quite literally stole my opening statement in her conclusion, but I'm going to make a slight modification and say, I'm sure as your next 1 year at Oxford unfolds, the Oxford Union is going to be an intense source of debate and intellectual simulation across economics, politics, and social topics. And yeah, welcome to Oxford. But today, let's get to the topic. I was surprised when I Googled this topic, when I was chosen as the speaker. The first thing you do these days is Google it up, Google the topic. And I Googled it up, okay, the only profit motive, and then the top article was in fact the actual article that was written by Milton Friedman on September 13th of 1970, right? That was like 46 years ago from this very month. And the concluding statement is what caught my eye. It is this very statement, but it goes beyond. It is, I'm just quoting it. It says, there is one and only one social responsibility of businesses: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without fraud or deception, right? Key points, my friends, are maximizing resource utilization without fraud or deception. And once I'd read this, I was at a loss. Why is this debate even happening, right? Come on, you're not cutting corners, and you're given an arena, and is it wrong to maximize your profits in that? I would say no. I mean, to correct Tana's example, your life's objective should not be just eat, eat, eat. Your life's objective should be, as long as you work and play, you should eat, right? And as long as you can taste a variety of food, it's good. Go ahead, have it. I'll give you another, and just building upon Professor Oren's points on where the government and the regulations should stand. I'll give an example of Formula One, right? Every year, FIA, the regulatory body, sets certain limits. They come out with the dimensions of the Formula One racing cars, the fuel load it can carry, and that's why you keep seeing variations in like who wins what race, right? But once you're in the game, every player wants to have the fastest car in the circuit. It's not like you're in the middle of the race and then you realize, oh, this car is burning a lot of fuel, so let me slow down and save the world some fuel, right? So to set the regulations is in the jurisdiction of the governments and the regulators. But once you're in the game, you go for the kill. You maximize profits, and it's not that you're maximizing profits for yourself. There's a whole gamut of people you're doing that for. Your investors, your employees, and that itself is what is social responsibility. The second perspective I want to bring about is today, thanks to technology, we are in very, very creative and innovative times. Market opportunities are grabbed left, right, and center. And I'll give you an example here again. Probably this might be very relevant to you, considering the fact you just arrived here. Student loans, right? So when 15 years ago, I remember one of my first cousins embarking to US to finish his higher studies. And in India, basically, he literally had to mortgage whatever he had and to raise funds for his higher studies. And upon that, he had to pay a huge interest rate. But today, I'm sure that the student loans are just a phone call away, no paperwork. The funds directly gets transferred to the university. And the last time I heard, one of our really good SBS alums is actually building a startup which is actually planning to refinance prodigy loans at an even cheaper interest rates, right? So it's a super hyper-competitive market out there. So if there is an opportunity, the industry players are going to capitalize on it for the good of the society. Point number three, perspective number three, I would say. So currently, I am interning for a turnaround fund, and which owns a portfolio of companies, which are mostly British vintage brands, manufacturing companies. And trust me when I say this, the last thing you want to see when you go to these companies is an empty shop floor with probably people who have spent the last 50 years in this company out on the streets with no work. So my point here is, it's all rosy and cushy for Morgan Stanley, for GE, who have like huge cash balances, who have a very, very strong balance sheet to talk about flashy vision and mission statements. But if you are a small firm, fighting for money, fighting for cash flow, fighting to finance your debts, that's the last thing that you would probably think of. I mean, in this occasion, I probably want to quote one of our most influential philosophers of the 20th century, Swami Vivekananda. He was very pragmatic in saying, don't talk Vedas to a hungry man. A bowl of morsel is as Vedas. And for my friends who do not know what is Vedas, Vedas are spiritual texts in the Hindu philosophical context. So thank you very much, and wish you a very resourceful and enjoyable year at Oxford, and have a great evening. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his speech, and now look to Vikram Dalal to continue the case for the opposition. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, to these illustrious chambers. I want you to feel the weight of history and remember what Dina said. This is part of your responsible leadership course, and the session is being video recorded. I'm an entrepreneur, and I love profits. Profits show me that my customers value my business. Profits allow me to expand my business and reach even more customers. But profit is not the purpose of my business. It's not why my business exists. I'm a startup. My business exists because I have customers who value this business. Customer delight and not investor delight is my responsibility. Profits are just a byproduct and only one of the several measures of business performance. In this world-class school, at this world-class university, you will be introduced to several such measures of business performance. But Milton Friedman claimed that the sole responsibility of the executive was to create value for the shareholders. Professor Hellman will take you through the many fallacies of Friedman. But to understand why this concept was so widely adopted, we have to look at the context. In the 70s, the American companies were faced for the first time with the heat of global competition. In this environment, it was very appealing for the American executive to focus just on making money and leave aside the responsibility of employees, customers, and society. But I want you to think about the consequences of such a policy. Social responsibility was left to the governments. And the governments of the day, they caught on with this trend of, it's not my responsibility. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher promised us minimal government and coined fancy phrases like economic freedom, which touted that making more money was the solution of all government problems. High risk for high returns was followed with a missionary zeal, often forgetting the social responsibility of risk management, which was left to the successor of the successful executive. Jack Welch is a prime success of this model. During his term, General Electric went from 14 billion of market capitalization to 462 billion. You have a case study about Jack Welch, but for this argument, I'll point out that over the next 10 years after his departure, 60% of that value was lost. It was also found that most of that value created was a result of risky financial leverage of GE Capital, which of course was subsequently sold, and the mission of the company was changed to a more socially responsible one. Everyone in this room knows about the financial tricks of business. There are several examples that I can point to, from Enron to WorldCom, from Freddie Mac to Lehman Brothers, from Barney Madoff to Satyam. The list goes on. Yes, please.
Of the millions of cases of profit-maximizing enterprises that have delivered goods and services to people that they want and have made them a better place in the process and brought down poverty to the lowest level in history.
That's a question. I'll leave it for the question time. Thank you. The SWIFT index is by Deloitte, looks at all over 20,000 American companies since 1969. It has found that there was a over 70% decline in the return on assets since 1969, almost in a straight line. The theory of profit motive has failed on its own sole benchmark of creating market value. The return on assets is a very useful matrix because it shows us how the world's limited resources are used to create value for all its consumers. That is, all living beings on this planet for now and forever. Every resource, my friends, is a social responsibility, and we must hold every business accountable to it. And while we can always wait for the regulators to play catch up with these misguided but often very ingenious executives, we must today strike at the very roots of this capital destructing disease. We must abolish this concept of profit sans responsibility. Let us all vote firmly against the proposal. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his speech. Now, before we go to the final speeches on either bench, it's now time to bring in the floor. Now, normally, if you come to a debate on a Thursday night, you'll actually give a speech. You'll give a speech in proposition or opposition, and that will last 2 to 3 minutes. Tonight, because it's your first time in the union, we'll go with questions. And what I'd like to do is take 2 questions for the proposition, and then 2 questions for the opposition. So please raise your hand now if you have a question for the proposition. First one I saw right in the corner over there by the fire door. Yes, you. If you could stand up and state your question and wait for the microphone to get to you, actually. I apologize to the person carrying the microphone for choosing the person furthest away from you.
Hi. So you mentioned Milton Friedman's quote about without deception and fraud, but it's already been raised that in some countries, deception and fraud might not be regulated or it might not be illegal. So would you not actually argue by that logic that Milton Friedman himself, in countries where deception and fraud is legal, would be saying you should still follow your conscience and your morals to some degree?
Thank you for your question. Was that aimed at a specific member of the proposition, or?
It was the guy who used the quote, so was that, yeah.
Madhu, if you'd like to respond to that. Come to the front.
I'm glad that you recognize the diversity in businesses, right? That was supposed to go into my speech, but given the limited time, I couldn't do it. Yes, you're right in saying certain cultures and certain ways, different businesses across the demographies have different DNAs. Businesses in Japan are probably totally different from the way businesses in India are to the way businesses in US are. But I think that is where the governments come in, right? Today, most of the world are led by democratic governments, and it is the collective opinion of the people that actually ends up as the voice of the government and ends up in terms of regulations. So if people themselves are okay to fraud and deceit, if they say, okay, this is our culture, this is fraud, I'm okay, why the hell do we, how can we repair that, right? I think, yes, that said, I would also say having an overarching universal code across the world could probably be dangerous for the very point that that overarching definition would not honor the true diversity of the different business models. Hope that answers your question. Slightly? Come on. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to look now for somebody who has a question for the opposition bench. Please raise your hand. Right, someone jumped out of their seat at the back. Please could we go to the man in the white t-shirt? And if I could ask the people on the benches to ensure their answer is shorter than their speech, that would be great. Thank you.
This is to all of the opposition, not any specific member, but how do you deal with dissenters? Or people who quit from the system? Because obviously if everybody acts with the best intentions, then your idea is great, but if there's always going to be somebody who defects in sort of an iterated prisoner's game. And how do you sort of deal with that in the practical world?
I think you mean what happens in a world where we ask firms to be guided by a moral compass if people haven't got a moral compass and cheat. That's terrible. Such people should not be allowed to run businesses. I'm certainly not suggesting that we should do away with all regulation, that we should abandon the profit motive and that we should have a situation where everybody runs around skipping and hugging trees, and that everyone would be fine if we did. I'm simply saying, and I think we're all simply saying, that the profit motive is not the only responsibility that business people have. One of their responsibilities is not to go postal in the way you've described.
Now, please raise your hand if you have a question for the proposition. Yes, the woman on the bench, at the end of the bench over there, please. Sorry, there's a microphone coming to you.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I wrote it down while you were speaking, so I'm not being rude and checking. But it is now widely known that Tom's, by giving free fish instead of teaching how to fish, has done more harm than good. By flooding African and Asian markets with hundreds of thousands of free goods, it has distorted local markets, taken jobs and incomes away from local SME manufacturers, encouraged these economies to revert to a model of export of raw materials and low value-added products instead of selling high value-added products in the local markets. If they want to maximize profits by pretending to be a social enterprise, how is that doing better for the whole world? That's my question.
There will always be certain, when you're doing business, certain externalities that will not be good, but there will also be certain stakeholders that actually benefit from what they are doing. And at the end of the day, they are doing socially good and they are profit maximization. But yes, obviously, according to that article, yes, they are also affecting others, but they're also being positive for others.
Please raise your hand if you have a question for the opposition bench. Let's see who's trying to decide who's the most keen out of all of you. Oh, wow, someone's holding up a folder over there. Let's bring the mic over here. Can you wait for the microphone so we can get you on recording?
Hi there. My question is for speaker number 4, the young woman who worked for Rio Tinto. I was kind of curious, you made a claim that Rio Tinto has worked towards minimizing its impact on the environment, when in fact, didn't Norway just recently divest themselves from them due to controversy on their mining practices in Indonesia? And aren't they still under investigation for human rights violations, racial discriminations, and war crimes? I just am really kind of curious where your defense of Rio Tinto came from, because I think that was a really poor example.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I thought I'd receive that question, having worked in a mining company for years, that's a very, we're a very common target for regulators, society. And the real answer is that the regulations in a lot of the countries that that mining companies operate in are really remote, and the regulation has not caught up with the requirements. And so there is a lot of social pushback, but as the proposition would have argued, they are a lot of the time staying in the regulatory bounds. They are making a push towards being on top of that and trying to be ahead of the game, but they're not perfect, and it is a really easy industry to hate on because they're working with local indigenous communities, large-scale environmental extraction, and a diverse set of communities. But yes.
Thank you. I think given the willingness of people to get involved, we'll take one more for each bench. So if you have a question for the proposition bench, please raise your hand now. We're thinning, let's see a question up there. Can we go to the hand over there? I think, yes, you just put your hand up when I called your name. Dark hair woman, about 3 benches back. You can stand up.
I have a question from an economic perspective, because there's been a lot of studies done that increasing CSR responsibility actually might increase profits. And the most part, they say, focusing on corporate social responsibility does not detriment profits. So if it doesn't hurt, but you can still do something positive for society, then why not? Isn't that a Pareto improvement? Shouldn't businesses be doing that?
This is how I started. That there are many companies in the world where the profit motive is not standing in conflict with the common good. So these companies don't have to worry at all about the social good or the common good, because anyway, whether they think about it or not, they are contributing to the common good, right? So I'm not saying that there's always a conflict. In most cases, there is no conflict between profit motives and the common good. And then you don't have to regulate them because the invisible hand of the market will do it anyway. The question is what to do with those companies where there is a conflict between the private good and the common good. And my advice to everyone is that in those cases, particularly Rio Tinto, don't be deluded by sweet talk of mining companies that you don't have to regulate them because they are already doing the common good.
I'd like to take a final question for the opposition bench. Somebody's very keen over there, getting waves. This is quite exciting. Let's go with the gentleman patiently waiting at the end of the press bench over there. If you could wait for the microphone, which is just to your left there.
Yep, thank you. So my question is to the opposition, and anyone of you can answer. I've been hearing about this, this particular motion, and the question is that basically we are thinking about shareholders and stakeholders, right? And the motion is saying that we should actually take care about the shareholders, and the other one saying that we should actually take care of both shareholders and stakeholders. My question is, if you're not thinking about stakeholders, then stakeholders have always right to react to it, and in turn, they can turn down the profits. So actually, if you're taking care about the profits, you're actually taking care of both the parties. Am I right on this?
No, you're not. If I run a polluting company and pour poison into a river, I'm definitely harming my stakeholders, some of my stakeholders, but I may nevertheless make enormous profits if the village that relies upon that river is not a buyer of my products. For example, I have a responsibility, therefore, not to pollute the river, even if regulation allows me to do so, and that responsibility goes beyond my responsibility to make a profit.
I'd like to thank everybody who asked the questions, and I'd like to thank the speakers for your answers. You should know that if you get involved on a Thursday night and actually make a floor speech, you're invited to a drinks reception, which happens after the debate, and you'll get a chance to meet whoever the speakers are. So let this be the beginning of you putting your hand up at this point in the debate at the Oxford Union. So without further ado, I'd now like to turn to Professor Ludovic Philippou to close the case for the proposition. Thank you very much.
Let's start with an example. Imagine the University of Oxford can go online, put everything for free, available to anyone, and the strategy may pay off. We may get millions of people watching our lectures, enjoying them, and we do a killing. But it may not work. It may also be the case that people realize that what we teach is not that exceptional, and the university gets into trouble. Imagine in this example that the expected payoff is higher than the expected cost in this strategy, and therefore if you're profit maximizing, you should go for the risky stuff. You should go online and just go for it. Now the problem is if Oxford University goes for this and it turns bad, not only a number of us lose our jobs, but we also lose a lot of money in the houses we have in this city, and a lot of people in this city lose their jobs, etc. If Oxford University sinks, the entire city sinks. And so there is a so-called externality and a huge cost that is borne by other people of this decision. And this massive cost may then, if you take it into account, outweigh the benefits of this risky strategy. So in that case, you hope, everyone hopes, that the University of Oxford would do what is good socially, i.e. take into account the social cost of its decision and not look only at the benefits and cost from a pure university standpoint. So we all agree on that. Let's take another example. Let's imagine that I get appointed to a very crappy job, like CEO of Tesco, right? Could have taken Rio Tinto. Let's go for Tesco. People don't like me, I sell overpriced junk, it's a tough job, okay? I cannot tell my mom this is the job I got, This is really bad. So what I could do is that I could, in every single Tesco, have 2 full aisles full of French food at good prices. I get everyone to love me, right? Imagine that. You live in the UK and you get to eat French food at a reasonable price. It doesn't get any better than that, okay? Now the problem is that I'm buying myself an image at the cost of my shareholders, right? Because if Tesco doesn't do that, it's probably profit maximizing to sell overpriced junk rather than good French food at a reasonable price. Is that fair? Is it fair that I buy myself a conscience, that I call my mom and say, have you seen me on TV doing this great speech about getting better food into, schools and families in the UK, getting people to eat proper stuff, to discover that there is like real food out there, that it's very important for you, that you can be healthier with like eating properly. All these things that can be on TV every evening with my friend Jamie Oliver, and my mom would be very proud, but I'd be paying with someone else's money. That's a problem. We all agree that the wrong financial product should not be sold to the wrong people. We all agree that the University of Oxford should not gamble its finances away on a pure university profit objective. We all agree. But if we leave this to people's voluntary actions, we are in for some disappointment. We are in for some Tesco episodes. You'll have your country filled with French food. You don't want that to happen, do you? The reason why people should not sell the wrong financial products to the wrong people, why the University of Oxford should not gamble its reputation and its finances away, is because if they do, the people who make these decisions, they should go to jail and pay back for the damages they do on other people. If Rio Tinto should not pollute that river and this village down the stream, is because if they get caught, we should have laws that say that these executives who took that decision, they should go to jail and pay big time for polluting a river and damaging a village that didn't ask for it. Okay? That's why and how we prevent these sorts of problems. Ladies and gentlemen, social responsibility is too serious an issue, too universal an issue, too big an issue to be left to Sesame Street's characters. It's time to get real.
Thank the honourable member for his speech, and I would notify him that the union are actually recruiting a new chef. And if you had some French-inspired cooking and a break away from economics, we'd welcome you. I now turn to Professor Thomas Hellman to close the case for the opposition. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Life is not fair. And you probably think, oh God, he's going to argue that life is not fair and therefore we need to get rid of Friedman. No, I'm not going to argue that. I'm actually here first and foremost to say thank you for coming. Thank you for a fabulous debate. Thank you to the president. I want to give a special thanks to the opposition team for showing up. Wow. I wouldn't have shown up on that motion. There's no way I would have done that. But they were really courageous. I mean, Oren stood in front of you and sort of tried to keep a straight face as he was saying, you're going to rely on the government to solve this problem. Yeah, right, we all believe that one. Then he brings a bunch of examples about Al Jazeera, great examples which perfectly contradicted his main point. We went on to have some beautiful arguments. Now, I think you were really smart, and that's exactly what economists do. Your argument was based on saying, let me assume that half of what's happening in the world is irrelevant, which is there's a huge sector called the not-for-profit sector, and they're doing all of this stuff that's really important, but I'm not going to look at that. I'm just going to look at the other part. And then sort of the argument sort of tries to proceed. I'm not even going to, I'm just going to go straight to Ludo. I don't want to be here too harsh on everybody. And I mean, my God, Ludo knew he was losing this debate a week ago when he bought the T-shirt. He said, let me buy a T-shirt and let me talk about French food because maybe then I can get away with it. But, I mean, come on. Obviously, this is not fair. We also have Sesame Street on our side. We had the perfect analogy. We don't live to eat, we eat to live. And that's exactly what this motion is about. I think we're at the most passionate speed of an entrepreneur, and I'm going to come back to the theme of entrepreneurship. But I'm here to basically prove Friedman wrong, and that's not really that difficult. So, 4 points. Friedman is bad economics. I'm an economist, just like Oren, just like Alan. We've all learned economics. And Friedman is like 30 years out of date. And, economics is a young science. In those days, they didn't really know what to do with the Nobel Prize, so they just gave it to Friedman. But I mean, the economics is all wrong. It's very easy to prove that all of the assumptions that Friedman uses are wrong and all the conclusions are wrong. I'll leave the details to the footnotes. The second one, actually very, very fundamental. Friedman is wrong from a legal perspective, and the US courts got it all wrong for about 30 years. Because the motion doesn't say profits are bad. Did you read the motion? Apart from being sort of weird grammar, it says, increase profits. Like, they can only increase profits, which means like a perpetuum mobile. I mean, that's not going to work. There's only one and only one social responsibility. That's the problem. Nobody said that profits are bad. But how the courts have interpreted this is that corporations are not allowed to use anything else but profit. So here's a bunch of shareholders who actually want to do something and they're not allowed to do it. Why is there a not-for-profit sector? Why do we have B corporations, a really exciting development in the world? Because people thought this is entirely wrong. Why can you give me a straitjacket in which I, as a shareholder, can't do anything except get these profits? That's not what the shareholders want. So here's the third reason. So bad economics, bad legal foundations. It's bad for society. We all know that. We all know it, and the opposition, you guys sort of sitting on the wrong side because you gave all these beautiful examples of why it's bad for society. So I'm not even going to repeat that. The most important and for me most interesting one that maybe speaks to the heart of this audience is that no one in business thinks like this. So I spend my entire life thinking about entrepreneurs, and we talk about profits, obviously. And it takes about, all of 1 minute of a 60-minute conversation. And then for the rest, entrepreneurs care about creating value. And you've had a beautiful speech that exactly told you this. What do we have in our pocket? What did you use there before? It was an iPhone. Do you honestly think that Steve Jobs created the iPhone because he wanted to maximize profits? Do you honestly think if the shareholders of Apple had enforced the Friedman doctrine, we would have had an iPhone? No way. There is no progress. There is no innovation if you live by this. The only thing is private equity, and that's why Ludo is on that side of the world. For those of us who care about business, we know what motivates people. And putting a straitjacket that you're only allowed to look at one thing is never going to help our society create the value that we want to create. Thank you. Oh, I forgot to say one more thing. I have a couple more seconds. And we have a wonderful new president. I believe it's your first day. And thank you for hosting this event. It's been a real pleasure. He did forget to say one really important detail. So when you come into this room, you can use any door you want. But when you go out, make sure to take the no door. Thank you very much.
I thank the honourable member for his speech, and I was in fact getting to that point, but I appreciate jumping the gun. Of course, in tune with us being in parliamentary style, if you agree with the proposition, you walk out the door marked aye, and if you disagree and you want to vote with the opposition, you walk out the door marked noes, and someone will be there to count your vote, and we will read out that vote in the bar very shortly. Before we wrap up and before I thank you properly, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along. I know it was long. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please, a round of applause for our speakers. And I very much hope to see as many of you as possible at future union events. We've got a really exciting term card coming up of individual speakers, of debates, of social events, and that will be delivered to you in about a week's time, so plenty to be excited about. If I could ask you to remain in your seats whilst the guests leave, and then the results will be announced soon. Thank you very much.